When it comes to a home, it's then not about price. It's, do you want to live in the house that you can get for cheap that you're going to be unhappy in? Or do you want to find the house that you're going to be mega happy in?
Our motto is buy without regrets. And so
if you can buy a property that will serve you for 10 years as opposed to 3 years, that will serve you well. It's something.
Buying a great property today, that's not just what it's about. It's also getting something that could be ripe for improvement when the time is right for that investor or for the next buyer.
You think about, right, lifestyle, what's important to you? How do you get to work? What do you need for your family? What amenities like parks and shops? Then you look at the budget.
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm a mortgage broker since 2013. And in this podcast, we're going to be interviewing Australia's leading buyer's agents, ones with decades of experience, have the local insider knowledge on the street, and can really help you with your buying process, no matter whether you're a first home buyer, upgrade, or investor. In this podcast, you'll get access to Australia's leading buyer's agents' minds every week on a Thursday. What's the word on the street? Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates in the studio today with another Chris Gray. Some of our guests you might not have heard of, but he's been around the industry for a very long time. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Chris, I know you've been a buyer's agent around, decades, and, before it was a cool job to do. Can you give us a bit of an understanding of what were you doing before you became a buyer's agent? I think it's always interesting to understand someone's history and how they find their way into this profession.
Yeah, so basically accountant by trade. So my skill is basic numbers. So I'm not a great accountant. I failed tax 3 times. I was just doing commercial accounting within a firm rather than being a chartered accountant. But my skill was numbers. And what it taught me at the age of 22 was rather than work for a living and try and be a CEO and earn lots of money, I could make more money from buying one property than I could from having the job. So I also worked out that most of my friends couldn't afford a 1-bedroom unit because it would take all of your income. Whereas if I could buy a 3-bedroom house and rent 2 rooms out, I could actually live for free. So my mortgage was 8 times my income. It was more than my income before tax, let alone after tax, but which doesn't make logical sense. But the logic to me was, will I actually get a free house because I'll get 2 tenants that are paying me rent? And this is the logic that got me from buying property at 22, semi-retiring out of Deloitte at 31, and for 30 years, most of my life, having a pretty cool life of flexibility of working when I want, having more money and more freedom than most people. But it wasn't from picking suburbs, being a genius, doing anything. It's basically basic maths, no emotion, taking action.
Yeah, so let's say you're 22 or something, you bought your first house, and 31, you sort of sounds like you jumped out of the corporate ladder. Is that sort of when, and when was this? Is that when you became a buyer's agent? Is that sort of when you thought, hang on a sec, I've been doing this for myself for so long, maybe I should start doing it for others?
Yeah, so basically in about 2002, I was 31. I was at Deloitte, not doing accounting, but doing a recruitment job where I had interviewed 1,000 CFOs in the last 2 years. And I realized that all of these guys in their 50s and 60s didn't have what I wanted. They didn't have high-paying jobs. They worked 60 hours a week. They had wives that were spending, kids at private school, massive expenses. I was earning 80 grand a year or 60 after tax. I was earning $600,000 a year from property. So I had 6 properties, 4 in the Eastern Suburbs, 2 in the UK, earning me 100 grand a year in capital growth. And that was the good old days of low doc loans where you could actually get 80% of your money. And I was a good enough accountant to realize earning 600 grand for doing nothing is better than earning 60 from working 40 hours a week. And then they really knew that there's something was wrong when I tried a salary sacrifice, a 355 Ferrari, and they worked out the fringe benefits tax was more than my wages. And they saying, we're the partners earning millions of dollars. You're the office junior. How come you've got a Ferrari and we haven't? So that's when I decided to give up work. Literally did nothing for a couple of years. I worked as an extra on TV sets just for a bit of fun and got myself a job on Channel 9 as the real estate expert on a program called My Home. And then I suddenly started to realize property didn't go up forever. And it goes through flat periods. And when you're not working, then you're spending 24/7. So I thought I need to create an income. I thought, why not teach people? All these people from Deloitte are saying, Chris, you don't work, you got a Ferrari, you got a boat, you live on the beach, you don't work. You're only 32 now. How do you do it? So I started teaching people. And because I didn't sell anything, everyone believed what I said because I had no vested interest to sell them anything like most people do. And from there, then people actually said, look, rather than paying you a couple of grand to go and teach me, I don't want to deal with the real estate agents. I don't know what I'm looking for. I'd rather pay you 10 or 20 grand to just go and do it all for me, because I'm sure I'll save many times that by you doing it better than me. And that's when Buyers Agency started, and there's maybe 10 of us in Sydney in those days.
I think that's, you've sort of highlighted what, the area we're going to talk about today. And what I think builds trust the most is sort of consistency, right? Someone who sort of doesn't jump around with all their different strategies and doesn't also have confirmation bias, doesn't just so biased they don't even think about other strategies. But have you always had like an Eastern Suburbs focus and the apartment market in particular? Is that sort of always been your strategy? Have you pivoted over the years?
So look, when I started at 22, there was no books, no TV programs, no magazines. There wasn't even investment loans. I had to go to a French bank to get an investment loan. I don't know if Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was around those days, but I definitely hadn't heard of him. So it's all self-taught. So what I decided was, if I go and buy a property and rent it out to someone that's got a good job in London, they don't want their boss to find out that they trashed the apartment or they haven't paid their rent. So they're going to be a good bet. And that's basically what I thought was my investment strategy. And I thought good people pay the rent and they do the right thing, whereas people in a less highly demographic area aren't going to do that. And so I wanted nice and easy. And so since then, I've done 500 shows on Sky Business News. I've interviewed experts from banks to valuers to economists and all the rest of it. All the stuff I've learned has actually brought me back to the same thing. And the main thing is, it's all about supply and demand. So the biggest thing around the world these days is, how can property prices keep rising if wages aren't keeping up with house price inflation? And they say, look, part of the reason is our parents' generation had a quarter acre block. Now we have smaller units or smaller blocks. They had double-digit interest rates. We have single interest rates. They had one income earner. We've now got two income earners. We've got government grants. They didn't have that. So that's part of the explanation. But the other thing they said is, if there's no more and rich people want it, prices go up. So say if you talk about Bondi Beach, 3-story height limits, can't physically build any more property. If you knock down a block of 12, you can probably only replace it with 8, because now you've got to go taller ceilings further from the neighbors. And 1 or 2 million in Bondi isn't $100 million. That's a normal price for people that, sure, for the average Australian, they say it's a ridiculous price. But for locals, they can afford it because they've got rich parents, they've got good jobs, they've got deposits. So this is the thing they said that drives the house price growth. And so, yes, I've looked at lots of different strategies on Sky. We've looked at regional, we looked at off the plan, NDIS, all of these things that have happened over the last 20 years. And I've tried off the plan and I've made some money from it. I've tried house and land packages, made some money, but I didn't make as much money and I took more risk than if I just bought that Coogee, Bondi, Manly, Balmain type, normal type Sydney property. So yes, I try lots of different things, but I keep coming back to the same thing. And the book I wrote in 2008, literally it's almost 20 years old and we haven't changed a word because nothing's changed.
You've hit the nail on the head with the supply and the demand and the scarcity and the demand being a really strong buyer. You were talking about a renter there, but it's also, do they really want to own that type of property? And back in the day, maybe people wanted houses, but, houses are out of reach and, apartments are obviously now getting driven a lot by owner-occupier demand rather than sort of investors. You always have maybe looked at sort of the Eastern Suburbs and the apartment market, and there has been really limited supply. Have you sort of had a reason why you haven't focused more on the housing market, or do you believe that, it's better to have a number of units to protect you?
Sure. So one of the other things that I learned, and a lot of it I learned from a guy called John Edwards from Residex, that a lot of the old school people would have known. He was almost the go-to person for capital growth because he used to produce reports for about $200 to give you, these are the top 100 suburbs in New South Wales or in Queensland or in Victoria for the highest capital growth. And so I get him on Sky every month and debated stuff. It's a great resource. And he said if you keep buying around the median price, it means the average person can afford it. And then what you do is you buy what the median price buys you in that area. So in Sydney, say the median price now is, say, call it 1.5 million. What that buys you in Sydney is a 2-bedroom unit in the Eastern Suburbs, Lower North Shore in the West. If you wanted to buy a house for that value, you've got to go pretty far west to get a house for 1.5 million, or down south or obviously up north. Whereas if you're in Melbourne for the median price, you're probably looking more at a townhouse or a semi. Anywhere else in Australia, you'll be in a house. And so again, the old school rule was land appreciates and buildings depreciate. And so you should always buy high land content, i.e. your house. But the new age rule is it's the quality of the land, not the quantity. So for instance, your $1 million in Bondi or in Manly or in Balmain gets you 60 or 70 square metre unit. Melbourne, you get your townhouse. Queensland, you get a 3 or 4 bedroom house if you're lucky. Northern Territory, you get 1,000 acres. But on a summer's day, are you going to get 100 people queuing up for that 1,000 acres or that house in Queensland to go and rent it? Probably not. Whereas we've all seen the social media and the news, 100 people queuing up at Bondi. And that's the thing. So it's the quality of the land, not the quantity. So I'd rather a smaller amount of quality than a massive plot of land in the middle of nowhere.
It's a good answer, right? And if you start going, oh, well, I buy a $3 million house, then, there's challenges with land tax, there's challenges with renting. It's if you want to sell, you can't really sell one. What are the apartments versus the house, and potentially yields are higher, etc. So, yeah, there's also a lot of other benefits there than going all in on one big house. But you mentioned before around the restrictions on development. Obviously, in the last 12 months, Chris Minns has come out and changed zoning in a lot of places and allowed developments. But when you think about the Eastern Suburbs, obviously more is coming, but it's different, right? And how are you thinking about that change and how it affects the current owners of apartments, say, in the East?
So look, things do change in time, but it's unlikely to be dramatic. And I can't see the future beyond anyone else can. But I've noticed things haven't really changed, which is why my book hasn't really changed. So for instance, in Rose Bay, supposedly about a dozen houses have been bought for hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, first of all, this is reported. The chances are if a developer's paid way over the odds, he hasn't actually bought them. He's bought them on an option contract to see if he can actually get something through council. So it's not a guaranteed deal. So whatever you read in the media, don't take it as gospel. But anyway, let's just say it has been done. The chances are they're not going to be building a 500-unit Meriton Tower in the middle of Rose Bay. I can't see it ever happening. The chances are like Double Bay. So a lot of Double Bay apartments have been knocked down and they've been rebuilt. But they're not building affordable housing at $1 or $2 million. They are building $5 or $10 million apartments for the downsizers that have sold those houses. And quite often what the developers do is if they buy the house off that old person, they give them a discounted property in the new development anyway. So I reckon with those, say, dozen houses, they'll probably build maybe 50 apartments at the most, but they'll probably be $5 million apartments. And so is another 50 properties going to change the housing supply in Rose Bay? No. And even if it did, it's not at the price point for the average person. So I generally don't think these things are going to happen. Whereas if you look at someone like Pyrmont was on the government or the bank's blacklist back in 2000s because of all the development. You now look at Zetland. Zetland's got tens of thousands of apartments. Meriton's now down at kind of Botany Way, kind of back end of Maroubra. Again, tens of thousands of units. So if you were a small property around the corner, sure, someone probably wants a brand spanking new one that's cheap from Meriton, no matter what you think about the quality of the builds and the rest of it. But there's still the amount of people, say in Maroubra, for instance, that are surfers, that work in the city, they want to surf before work, they don't want to drive their car, they will be paying a premium to be in an old 60s block of units with no technology, but it's double brick, it's still standing, and it's got a garage. It's not flash, but it's 2 minutes to the beach.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed it, right? The new stock that's coming isn't competing with current stock. It's a lot higher priced. It's targeting a much different market. Whether it's going to be bigger for a partner, for the family market, and more price-like houses, and, or targeting the downsizer market. And you're absolutely right. The cost to own the land and the cost to build means it's just not feasible for developers to build anything that's high density like you've seen in other pockets. So, let's talk about the apartment market. You've been buying in the Eastern Suburbs, obviously buying a lot of the established, older, like you said, those red bricks. How many apartments do you think you've seen and you've sort of bought over the years? Do you feel like you start to know the streets, every single building, and you just really... what's some of the big learnings you've made over the years by looking at those thousands of apartments?
We're specialists in a very, very tight market. So we typically avoid the CBD because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building tall towers. So we do that 5 to 15K. So basically Eastern Beaches, Lower North Shore, kind of up to Manly Way, and inner west like Balmain, like our Annandale thing. And so we've seen thousands and thousands of apartments. We've bought thousands of apartments over the years as well. One of my main guys, Kel, who does most of my buying, he was born in Coogee. He's gone to school with the agents. He's then worked on the sales agent side at McGrath and First National. So he's worked alongside all of these agents. He's known them for 40 or 50 years. we operate we're very black and white. If we say we're going to do something, we go and do it. We're not trying to steal properties for half price from old grannies and play tricks and the rest of it. We're buying lots of properties. But again, we're not buying thousands because there isn't thousands to buy. So if you go to a buyer's agent or someone that says, oh, I've got millions of customers and I turn over hundreds of millions of dollars, how are they going to find you deals? Because there isn't the money in it to handpick stuff. It's like getting a suit from a tailor from Jermyn Street in London versus going to, I don't know, Myers or something for your store. You're getting a handpicked investment or home where someone understands every single property, every single street in those areas because they bought in every street and they've gone down every street every day in their lives for the last 50 years kind of thing. That's effectively what you're getting.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And I think that local expertise, you just accrue that knowledge year after year and know the buildings to avoid. But if you think about a new block comes up, let's say you had something you didn't know, what's sort of your decision-making process to, I guess, point out the red flags? Like, I'm not going to buy on that because it's a busy road. Like, what's the thought process you go through to say, actually, no, this one could be considered and it's worth going and have a look at?
Sure. So even though we do know everything, or not everything, but pretty much everything about these properties, what they're worth, the rental yields, the upsides and the downsides, we tell our clients don't trust anyone in property because there's so many scams, there's so many people with vested interests and everything else. So we say, don't even trust me. Sure, we're going to be there to support you, but we're going to put things in place to make sure that you're getting independent advice on everything. So first of all, you know you're going to buy in a good suburb with us because we only buy in blue chips. We don't buy in secondary. We don't predict the future. We go for guaranteed suburbs that have always been good. So like your Bondis, your Coogis, the Manleys, Balmains, all those ones I mentioned. Then we say, let's get an independent bank valuation, but not a bank valuation that costs $100 or $200. These cost $600 to $700 or $800 that they'll physically go in the property. They'll do a 30-page report, not a 2-page report. They'll give you 6 or 12 comparables, not 1 or 2. They'll have been in those comparables probably, and they'll give you a full report. And the chances are, if you get a valuation for $1 million and we buy that before it comes on the market, the indication is if you went to auction and competed with other people, the chances are that would have sold for $1.05 million or 1.1 million. So straight away, we've made you maybe 4 or 5 times whatever we've charged you in the first place. Then let's get an independent building report and building and pest if it's a house. Again, $400 or $500 to get someone independent to use kind of damp meters to try and find concrete cancer, all of these kind of issues, and then do the strata report as well, which is another $300. So they're spending about $1,500. But why wouldn't you? If you're spending 1 or 2 or 3 to 5 million on a home, why wouldn't you spend $1,500? But the reality is Joe Public never does it because they know the chances of them winning at auction are maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20. Whereas when we go in, we know we've got a 95% chance because generally we're not going to auction. So even if they've got to get 2 sets of reports because one goes wrong or we get beaten at the last minute, that is sensible money. As soon as people don't do that, that's where you hear the stories on Current Affair to say, oh, I bought in a mining town or I bought a lemon. Everyone else knew about it apart from me. It's because they've taken that shortcut and they won't spend money on due diligence.
There's often a common belief in property circles, particularly around sort of older apartments, that, you know, you're much more of a safer bet. They haven't got the building defects issues of all the new stuff, which a lot of people have understood that now over the last 10 years. You know, a lot of the apartments built over the last 25, 30 years have been pretty average, right? They are changing, I would have to say. And I think the construction industry is well on top of that. But, you know, I think there was always a belief that if you bought an Art Deco, an older brick building, you didn't have any issues. Is that sort of true? Or do you find when you're doing these building and reports on buildings and you're getting someone to go through, they are actually finding a lot of issues that have been sort of, these apartments are getting a bit older now and got to be really careful?
Look, you've definitely got to be careful. 99% of them sail through. Look, it's like buying a second-hand car. Sure, there's going to be a bit of damp, there's going to be a bit of this and a bit of that, and that's what you're buying. So again, we always say clients should have a buffer of 10, 20 or 30 grand per unit for those special levies. The biggest thing with apartments, especially in Sydney, mixture of 2 things is it's either concrete cancer because you're by the ocean, there's salt in the air, there's obviously kind of plenty of sea air and stuff like that that's then rotting the steel in the concrete, and quite often you can't see it. And we've had it in buildings that I've been chairman of the committee, and then suddenly we've had a big build because all of the balconies have been rotten and no one could see it. And so even with the building inspector or a strata inspector, you're not going to guarantee that you're going to see it. And if you don't fix it straight away, it can be millions and millions of dollars and the building can fall down. But if you've got a building where the strata is on top of things all the time, it's like anything. Like with normal cancer of humans, you nip it in the bud early, you go and get your skin checks every year, chances are it's not going to be that bad. Also, the other problem we're finding now is with, say, some damp issues that we're getting, say from roofs or waterproofing. Now there's legislation that says, because there were so many shonky people that would go out and fix a problem, charge you 50 or 100 grand, and you've still got the problem next year. Now it's all got to go run through engineers. It's then kind of vastly over-engineered. So they go and spend maybe 200 grand to fix a 100 grand problem, but supposedly at least it is 100% guaranteed now. And from what I hear is even the directors are actually personally responsible, not just their companies, if there's a warranty issue and stuff like that. So look, it's cost, but I had one in Maroubra that we had to spend about 40 or 50 grand, but I bought the unit for about 500 grand. It was then worth 1.5 million. So I've made $1 million to go and reinvest 50 grand. Sure, I still don't want to spend 50 grand, but it's one of these things you've got to do, just like getting your car serviced.
We've definitely seen some issues, but it is a rarity compared to common, which we've seen in obviously a lot of the new builds. And I do think you do definitely need to be careful. You can't just sort of blindly sign without checking the strata report and reading the minutes and check if it's one of those better buildings. But do you think it really matters when you're looking at the one or the studio or the two? Is it really just looking at that all those units have a different type of demand and they've also got different types of scarcity at a certain price, depending on the client's budget, you can still get good assets. It's just, you've got to be careful what you try to get a good value for money, I guess.
100%. And it's not necessarily about good value. Like everyone wants to get a property cheap. But again, is when you look at these units that have gone from 500 grand to $1 million in say 10 or 15 years, so ideally doubling every 10 years if you're lucky, whatever you paid, whether you paid 500, 475, 525, or even 550, even if you overpaid 10%, in hindsight, it doesn't matter. Yes, if you could have bought for 500, yes, you're better off. But I'd rather pay 500 to get the decent property than get the one for 475 that's a lemon, that's on the wrong side of the street or didn't have parking, because in time, that's going to compound. And so we always buy with parking, and there's arguments with Uber now and electric vehicles, you don't really need it. But I believe you do. If you've got to pay a bit extra to get the parking, I'd always get the parking. And look, in my portfolio, I've got a mixture of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So we've still bought in Sydney in the last year. So this is in 2025. We've still bought between 600 and 700 grand in blue chip suburbs, in properties that are more than 45 or 50 square meters. With the cheaper ones, you actually get a better rental yield. You can get about 5% rental yield in Sydney in a blue chip suburb, again, in a small block of 10 or 20, in a good suburb for that kind of money. And again, as you rise to the 2-bedders at 1.5 million, or the 3-bedders at 1.5 to 2 plus, then the rental yield goes down. But ideally, you're buying a better property in a better street with a better view that, sure, the rent might be 1 or 2% less, but ideally then the capital growth is 1 or 2% more. So you've got a bit of a mixture.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously a lot of value add around your focus around sort of the building and pen evaluation, building a strata report, etc. That is a bit different. Not a lot of buyers agents do that. They don't want to put extra costs on their client, but I can absolutely see the benefit in doing that.
Typically, it's not actually about the client. So yes, it's harder to sell the client to say, I'm going to charge you 2% plus $1,500. But the biggest thing is it makes the job 10 times as hard. So even real estate sales agents, they say, there's no way you can buy in a boom market for valuation. We've bought on valuation for 20 years. We've done it every single time. And so most people say it's impossible because, again, you're in the mortgage business. You know how conservative valuers are. To buy in a top suburb, in a top location on valuation, it's bloody hard. But that's what we do. And we choose to do less volume than a lot of other competitors, but we do the right things. So our rule in our business is we'll buy what I would buy for myself personally, and I'll pay the same price. And 2 of the main people that I've got working with me are ex-clients that have then chosen to work for us because they believe in what we do and that it's honest and ethical. And that's the kind of property company they want to work for.
Yeah, you mentioned around obviously that, and I imagine you're using that valuation in your negotiation, and you're a straight shooter. You've been around for so long. They know your team, right? And they know your process, and they know you've got a pre-approved buyers, and you're not going to stuff them around. And, you're going to be someone good to work with for a real estate agent, right? Who wants to get a sale done, right? But when you think about the sort of value of buyer's agency and over the years, you get better and better at what you do. What in your mind, when you get the client on the other end of the transaction, what's some of the things, the intangible things they didn't expect that, you changed the game for me there? That was just so valuable. I wasn't expecting that.
Well, typically now there's 1,000,001 buyer's agents, and everyone thinks they're a buyer's agent now. They see the TV programs, but whether they can actually do a deal or not, and whether they earn more than 50 grand a year is a completely different question. So most of those guys will sell it on, rather than do 2%, I'll go and do it for 1% because they haven't got any clients and they're desperate for business and they've got to put food on the table. And they're selling it on, I'll get you an off market. Just being an off market doesn't make it a great deal, because say you've got someone that's selling their property for $1 million, everyone thinks they've got the best property in the street and they've got done the best reno and the rest of it. The average seller wants to sell their property for 1.1. And so a lot of people say, do you deal direct with sellers? And I said, most of the time I don't want to, because if we tell them it's only worth $1 million, they're not going to believe us. Whereas if there's a real estate agent in the way, he can then go and say, it's not worth 1.1 million. And sometimes if we get off markets, we tell the agent to say, right, we're ready to put in an offer, but your client's still at 1.1, go and put it on the market. Go and show them that you've had 30 or 40 groups through, but no one's talking 1.1 million. Whereas these guys, they're not going to be at auction. They've done their due diligence. They were straight as an arrow from the start. Here's the check, just bank it, $1 million, you can move on and buy your own property. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing. I think the main difference, so most clients will buy based on that we can buy them off market properties that they'll never otherwise see. In my mind, from what I see and what I see clients doing stupidly, is we'll go and buy them the ugly duckling in a better location that can easily be painted and carpeted and rendered on the outside. They'll buy the beautiful one on the wrong street on the main road because it looks good and the coffee's kind of in the percolator, the bread's in the oven, it's got no parking. And I've had really good mates go and look at properties in Tamarama and say, Chris, this is amazing, I should buy it. And I'm saying, no, it's a nightmare. Tamarama's hard enough to park in the winter, let alone summer, but they've been sold, the property's been styled, the agent's done an amazing job, and they've sold them the dream. And so we're buying people what's good on paper on Excel, because a lot of my properties I haven't seen for 10 or 20 years. But when it grows from 500 grand to $1 million to 1.5, I don't care what it looks like, because it's a money-making thing for me, not an emotional thing. And obviously when it comes to a home, it's then not about price. It's, do you want to live in the house that you can get for cheap that you're going to be unhappy in? Or do you want to find the house that you're going to be mega happy in?
I mean, the amount of times you go in there and you sort of get blown by the styling and the music, and they point your face down the view or whatever it might be, but then you think, yeah, hang on a sec, it's a small second bedroom, or it's got lots of stairs coming in and there's no parking, and you start to look past the fundamentals.
We're in the best suburbs in the country, and obviously that's a biased thing for the people that don't live there. But again, we've got the top agents in the country that are selling. Those agents are very, very good. They're highly trained. They've got the latest technology. They've got the latest styling. They've got the latest sales techniques. They're very, very good. And again, we have jokes with them off the side. Like when you're in the industry, you have different conversations to inside and outside. And I remember people joking to say, oh, we got this guy to pay 200 grand over the odds. And then the guys realize that he needs to sell it. They go back to say he bought an apartment for 1.2 million. He's then gone back to say, oh, I bought 2 million. I need to sell this one. Can you get me 1.2? Well, no, we can't, because it was only worth $1 million. And then suddenly it's an embarrassing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a good point there around the agents, and often the ones who are selling are super experienced. A highly competitive industry in real estate to get to the sort of what you call top dog, the one who's selling the predominantly. There's usually only a couple in a suburb that dominate the market. You've got to be at the top of your game, and particularly, like you say, in the eastern suburbs of sort of Sydney there. I mean, you do mention there around buying the sort of the ugly duckling, but also some amazing fundamentals. I mean, and back in the day, you used to help a lot of clients with sort of renovating. Is that still a big part of the business where you can, add value, cost efficiently for clients, or you still try to focus on clients where you see that opportunity?
Look, when I first came to Australia, and I bought my first property in '99 in Coogee for $360,000. Views over Wedding Cake Island, and everyone said, oh, you Poms have got no idea. You come over with your pounds, you think you know it all. Imagine spending $360,000 on a unit. It's going to crash after the Olympics. And I was trying to find a beautiful building to buy in, and I realized that there wasn't any. It was a horrible yellow thing. But years later, we rendered the whole thing. And that's the thing with property. You're buying the location. That's why they have that saying, because you can render the outside, you can render inside, you can paint it, you can carpet it. 80% of what you're looking at is the view. You look behind me, I'm in Darling Point. We're looking at a view. We're not looking at the carpet. We're not looking inside. We're not looking at the out of the building. We're looking at the harbour. That's what effectively you're buying. So when we were buying in the early days, in kind of early 2000s, there would have been a lot of old age people that would have had an original unit from the 60s. They've had it for 50 years. So then they're in their 70s and they're dying off. So we used to do lots of renovations in those days. Now we're effectively in 2026. If something was bought in the 60s, it's already 66 years old. Those people would have left those apartments. So there's not many original units around these days. Most have been renovated. But look, lots of them you can still paint and recarpet and stuff. Some might have 20 or 30-year-old bathrooms and kitchens that you can still do. So yes, we'll do that. But that's the bonus for buying it. Just like the apartment that's gone from 500 grand to 1.5 mil, if we can go and do 100 grand reno and it lifts it by 150 and we get a 50 grand bonus, all well and good. But the main thing is I would rather buy today fully renovated with no value add than buy unrenovated tomorrow, because unrenovated tomorrow could take me 12 months. And in that time, if the market moves 10%, it's gone up 150 grand. I might not have made 150 grand on that reno. So much better to get in today before the rules change. And again, you know, from lots of your clients, we were telling people to buy in COVID when the market's down. They didn't. When interest rates were low, when they finally decided it was the time to buy, interest rates were at 6 or 7. They couldn't afford to buy what they could have before, and so they missed out. So you buy when you've got the cash and you've got the money to hold on.
Yeah, it's really hit people, particularly people looking to invest or upgrade their home, or, you know, it's made it much tougher, and that potentially you've got to take advantage when the opportunity is there, you know, prioritize it in your life. But absolutely, I agree. You know, you've got to get quality assets, not just looking for bargains, not looking for sort of potential opportunity. Sometimes, you know, the safest option's the best option. You know, Chris, if you have to think about some danger zones, you mentioned high density around Zetlands and Pagewood earlier and other high density pockets. You know, you mentioned looking at apartments and sort of with parking. You know, I totally agree with that particularly. What are some of the other things that you just, when you think about the apartment market where, you know, you that's where your specialty is across the city, where you just really try to avoid, obviously newer builds over the last 20 years, but what's some other things that common, you know, investors in that space get wrong? You mentioned around falling for the agents as well, styling.
If it's beautiful, it's probably you can't afford it. And that goes for whatever you buy in double bay. Double bay, double pay. And so lifts, gyms, pools. So in this building I'm in, which I rent, I don't buy from my family home, I reinvest. It's got lifts, it's got gyms, it's got pools, it's got koi carp, it's got award-winning gardens, it's got saunas. All of this stuff comes at a massive strata cost. And that's the thing, is that's what we don't want. We want 3-story walk-ups, no lifts, gyms, pools. If I want to live there, sure, I want those amenities, but not as my investments. Because my strata fees, I want to be paying $1,000 to $1,500 a quarter or so, not be paying $5,000 or $10,000 a quarter. So that's the main thing, is you go in there, you're buying an investment, and assuming you're buying an investment here, you're buying an investment, you're not buying something for yourself to live in. And a lot of people say, I'm going to downsize into it when I retire, or my kids can live in there. They're not. It hardly ever happens. And I don't want my kids to live in a $10 million luxury apartment for their first time that they move out of home. I want them to be in squalor and dirt, and to realize the value of money, and to be realizing that if they don't pay their rent to another landlord, they're going to get kicked out. They need to learn some life lessons rather than to live in Double Bay or Bondi with sea views and not pay the rent because daddy owns it.
Yeah, it's happened so many times over the years. And, you know, I don't think the parents are trying to do the wrong thing here. I'm a parent myself, you know, 2 young kids, but, you know, we're going to buy an apartment each for the kids. And, you know, what they're trying to do is, you know, set them up for the future, because they know how hard it is going to be to buy one day. But we sort of try to flip and say, hey, just build some wealth as a family first, and you can decide to help the kids how you like. But I think you're absolutely right that they're going to one day live in this apartment, and that's going to give them a free ride. I don't think that's the right strategy. Thanks so much for coming on today, Chris. You know, I always quite laugh with you and your business in a good way, your marketing, your advertising around cars. What's your poison at the moment? You've had, you know, Ford, you know, original Ford, you've had limos. I've seen you drive all sorts of things. What's the fun at the moment?
So my passion is just driving anything. My dad told me when I was about 13 or 14, So I started off in Porsche, then Ferrari, and then Lamborghini. I had an orange one and a purple one around the Eastern Suburbs. Then I grew some class, and no one had Lambos in those days. And so then I've gone for more different vehicles. So I had a 1985 stretch Cadillac limousine that I used to use for the Mystery Box Rally in the Outback. And in the Outback, you don't get many stretch limousines. It wasn't the most reliable car. Then I bought a fire engine as my backup car, and that was actually 22 grand, my cheapest and most reliable car I've ever had, from Royal Fire Service down in Victoria. My latest ones was I bought a tank. Now, technically, it's a 1953 Daimler Ferret Scout car. I was one of the first to get to the Bondi stabbing. My daughter, unfortunately, got caught up in that. I just happened to be around the corner. And Jay Leno's got one in the US, and he's got a YouTube video and says, the hardest thing about owning a tank and driving it as a daily car is how do you explain to your wife you need one? Whereas when she didn't pick up a phone when my daughter was in there and I turned up in a tank within a few minutes, I don't need to justify why I've got a tank these days. I recently bought myself a tuk-tuk. So I've got a tuk-tuk limousine, and I think it's one of 6 or 7 in Australia. I learned to drive in Bangkok. I paid a local Thai guy to teach me how to drive in Bangkok, and they see some fat white guy driving a Thai guy around Bangkok. They thought it's hilarious. And then I bought my cheapest car ever to replace the limousine. I bought myself a less than $5,000 Subaru WRX, which was an absolute bomb of a car, 1996, to go on these rallies. So on these back rallies that we've raised maybe 50 or 60 million for charity, or the main organisers have, you've got to have a car over 25 years old. So I bought this absolute lemon. We've just put a new engine in it. We're going to wrap it. It's going to be cheap. Yes, it's a boy racer. It's a Westie kind of car, but I've been driving it around Christmas and it looks a dog's breakfast with burnt paintwork. It is so much fun. I love it. And so my thing now is I don't care if a car's $1 million or $5. It's all about fun. And the other thing I do in Western Sydney is I drive a road train. So it took me a couple of years to get a license. I now drive 3 trucks in a row, 50 tons, about 50 meters long. And rather than go to a racetrack and have the challenge of driving the fastest, you try driving 3-truck trailer down normal streets in the Western Sydney and 4 or 5 hours of that, and you try and reverse it. To me, that's my energy boost of having a challenge in my life.
I absolutely love that, Chris. I think you're right. The experience, it doesn't mean what it costs, right? And I do think there was a funny story though with the Ford though, wasn't it? Didn't you leave your handbrake on and it ran off, or you had to sort of crash it or something?
Yes. So I drove one of the first original mass-produced cars, the 1912 Ford Model T, which had a crank start. You sat on the fuel tank for driving, and there's no seatbelt. Luckily, I just dropped my daughter off at school down in Double Bay. I was driving through Woolloomooloo in the morning, and it's got so much torque, this car, that if you can't get it out of gear, the brakes don't work. And I couldn't get it out of gear. The lights turned red, and as I was either going to back end into a truck, I mounted the curb, which was about kind of so high in Woolloomooloo. They're really high curbs, but these Model Ts can literally go up vertical, and I had to point it at a lamppost to stop the car. And it spewed oil all outside the Woolloomooloo Bay Hotel. Luckily, I had my beer belly as an airbag to stop me from flying out. But yeah, unfortunately, that was a write-off. But to drive a 100-year-old car, it was absolutely amazing fun, but dangerous as hell, which is why we've got airbags and seatbelts these days.
Yeah. I remember driving a tuk-tuk in Thailand myself a couple of times over the years, can I please drive, and paid them a bit of cash. And they're actually quite hard to drive. So thanks so much for coming on, Chris. Great chat. I mean, I think what you've really highlighted is just the, real fundamentals, right? Buying quality assets, stand the test of time, not chasing the latest fad, and putting a lot of due diligence. I think that's a key point to your value proposition. So thanks so much for coming on, and appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you got lots of value out of it. If you'd like to speak to our guest today, there's links in the show notes on how you can get in contact. And if you're buying your first home, upgrading, renovating, or need any finance-related queries, obviously we'd love to help. There's links in the show notes to us as a mortgage broker, and we look forward to next week's episode.